this breaking bread is a talk forum in which I can talk to people, I can explain stuff that I'm interested in, that I'm thinking about. Um, and most of it is material that has a great deal of history. This particular work, embodied attention in ensemble dance research practices, excuse me, I have a very sensitive throat right these days. What is significant about this work is that the history goes all the way back to when I began learning ensemble dancing, and then became fascinated with contact improvisation, the materials that became contact improvisation, and that eventually got the name contact. They were two very, very different attentional practices. And at that time, I was just beginning to be very, very interested in what the mind was doing when we were dancing. Events happened for me, like nearly jumping on my boyfriend's face in a contact improv dance. And the fact that I saw it coming, I knew it was there within the field of possibility, made me fascinated with the body that is a mind, and how I responded to that. It was an amazing experience. It was really very beautiful. And the fact that my body touches started to become very important, whereas ensemble dancing, as I was trained in it, was very visual and auditory, but not tactile. And getting these two attentional forms to live in one event of being within one dance became really a quest for 20 plus years more. And a lot of the work that I do now is based in all of that work. Eventually, I ended up having to get a PhD. So, and the PhD is on that work. It's on the, it's called Articulating Presence, Creative Actions of Embodied Attention in Contemporary Dance. So last November, in November, the Breaking Bread discussed a great deal of this subject. Particularly, I took on an interest in one aspect that I think is important of embodiment, that kind of sets up all the rest of the possibilities. And that is that we are always more than one. That we are entangled with our environments, that experientially, if we learn to experience as a field rather than as a point, does that make sense? Experiencing as a field rather than a point. A field is many, many, many points. So when we learn to experience as a field, another way of speaking about a field is to say a shape. A field could be a form, well, if we go into the geometry of attention is point, path, plane, and then what's the last one? Point, path, plane, a three-dimensional object, right? A form. And when we deal with that, when we look at that, we start to understand that point, path, and plane are all included in it. And that our attention gets to play on all of those geometries of understanding, and we do all the time. You pat someone's back, and you're telling them that you are interested in that point, that place. Place is a point. This place, generally. Now, a place can be many points. But very often when people use the word place, they organize it attentionally into a singularity. And we do that when we touch each other. If I touch you as a path, informing you of where I need you to be strong. I'm in the middle of a contact dance, and I touch a path so that you will strengthen yourself to feel me coming. My weight is on its way, or maybe force is on its way. When I do that, that's many points. And I've gone inside you. I may touch you on a surface. A contour is a surface. Right. Okay. So how we attend influences our embodiment, what we do in communication with another person. Ensemble dancing is very much about, at least as I practice it, is very much about communication. That's why ensemble forms are basic to the research structure of the ISSC. Now, contact improvisation is also very basic to it, but the ensemble form that I'm interested in really is generating from contact improvisation into ensemble. And we do this kind of geometry of attention because we are a multiplicity of possibilities. We are not limited to our flesh. We extend beyond the flesh. And as we do that, we start to inform the world about our embodiment and our entanglement with it, our attentional entanglement. Attentional, I'm saying attentional, not intentional. Intentional hasn't happened yet. Attentional is what you're doing, right? There may be intention within your attention. But for me, the kingpin is attention. What's here now? And how are you that which you are attending to? How does that attention and that embodiment communicate to a world you also are? I have to slow this down so you get it. To a world you also always are entangled as, not with. Because if you're practicing embodied attention and you attend to something both tactily, auditorily, visually perhaps, you are that thing. It is touching you, and what you touch, you have passed through. Why? Because touch does not stop at surfaces unless you are doing contour. It has always the potential of a dimensional practice or a pathway through. Make sense? You do not hold the ball on its surface and hold the ball. You reach into the ball to hold the center of its gravity. You have to stop your touch at the surface, but the touch itself does not stop at that surface. The reach, which is a critical word in all of my teaching, the reach is to the wholeness of that form. Make sense? Questions? You're getting it. Okay. So this geometry and the ability to communicate through a geometry of touch is fascinating and important, because at that moment you realize your attention is always in communication, always. With a book, you're in communication with the chair you're sitting in. You're in communication with another dancer if you're dancing with them. A person feels whether you are communicating with them as a singularity or as a multiplicity through how you are present with them. And they don't even know that's happening, by the way. That's not something that's surface knowledge, but it has everything to do with how they respond. Just as the geometry of your touch has everything to do with how your partner responds. Okay, so I'm going to just kind of skip over a few things that if I can find my notes here. So in my November aside, and you should know that I'm always writing asides in my newsletter, little bits that often speak to what I'm thinking about. And in November, as I started wanting to do Breaking Bread about ensemble dancing, I thought that I would write about some of the ways. This is hardly a complete list. Maybe someday I'll put together a complete list, and particularly, actually, there is no complete list, actually. So I kind of have given up on that idea, but there is a list, and the ISSC holds that list within the manual. The ISSC, the Institute for the Study of Somatic Communication, has a manual, and within that manual, there's a list of all this. One of these days, perhaps I'll write the book, but I have not written the book yet. Anyway, this is a list of the embodiment that embraces many beings, holds important skills within its practice, and some points about this embodiment. This embodiment feels space as a kind of concentration of substance that touches and is touched alike. So this works against the notion of empty space. This works toward an idea that touch, embodied touch, the mind that is attentive, that is touching, does not happen on a surface, but happens as a spatial practice, and it concentrates space. So if, we did this last week, if you hold your hands together, one facing the other, you'll feel that sense of concentration. Don't touch each other, but just come close and you go, oh, the one hand is feeling. And even if you try to play with it, now try it with an object. It doesn't have to be your hand. You start to become sensitive to that sense, proprioceptive sense, that there is more there, that you extend beyond your skin. And that sense of concentration is really important practice. Figure it out. Do it a lot. Do it with ceilings. Do it with things far. Do it with things close. Do it. And you may say, oh, golly, this is just my imagination. Go ahead. Let your imagination imagine. But don't stop, because it'll get stronger and stronger. Do not dismiss things just because the imagination is a part of the experience. It's not the whole of the experience. There's something else there. We are not scientists. We are physical beings that have experiences that can articulate those experiences. And the imagination is an extraordinary tool that offers ways to work against cultural sensibilities. Very important for culture to individuate you into bodies and limit the body, the size and shape of the body. Very important. You are movable at that form. If you attend to the body of your attention, now you start to step into the wild spaces that are untamed and are not as easily controlled. Now you are a dancer. That is, to me, the root of being a dancer, is that untamable aspect of physicality, mind, body. Okay, that was a mouthful. So then the next point was it attends to spatial presence in flexible modes, so that the eyes that can see a diffuse field of vision can concentrate that field as deftly as eyes that narrow a field of vision to a single object of attention. So basically saying your eyes do this, your touch does this, that you can hold many points in attention at a time, especially when you're doing contact improv. I love contact improv because it taught me that. I mean, for many reasons, but one of them is that. Okay. It moves inwardly and outwardly with speed and regularity, with the speed and regularity of a heartbeat, often faster. That is a comment about the temporal practices of embodiment. How does your body experience time? And if you are doing an embodied ensemble dancing, you want to be able to have a time sense that can do this kind of time sense and that kind of time sense. This moment and a field of moments. This moment that I am, this moment that the many are. There's also another oscillation that, if we're talking time practices, that is really important in the creative practice of ensemble dancing. And in creative practice, you want to be able to communicate this moment and this duration. A moment is not a duration, right? Now that means you can turn a moment into a duration by asking questions about it, by going inside and investigating it, and you'll go, oh, actually that moment really is so much longer than I thought it was, than I experienced it. So that you eventually get to where you can say, oh my God, every moment is a kind of infinity. This thing won't stop. I can keep going inward. But experientially within the moment, it's going to be a single moment. And the smaller that moment, the finer and more refined your experience will be, and your abilities to communicate will be. But a single moment, a duration of moments, is also an important thing to explore. Many moments. So dancers do this often. The moment that it takes to do that action, right? Swing your hand around. Go ahead and do that. Swing your hand around into a circle, an arc. You can feel the end of the arc at the beginning, can't you? It's an embodied temporal understanding. It's a duration. You're not in a moment now, you're in many moments. And those become a duration. Very important to be able to also experience durations. Why? Because that can be boring. You maybe want to go part way through it and send it someplace else. If you haven't felt the full circle, you don't understand the bottom of that weight experience. You don't know. You got to catch it at the bottom, because it gets lighter and lighter and lighter. At the bottom, you'll be able to toss it the furthest, right? You can feel that? Okay. Learning to throw yourself around is like a critical contact improv practice. Throwing yourself as parts is really important. So you've got to be able to fall apart. And falling apart means you're going to start experiencing yourself as many parts, many toys. You know, the body is a toy. It's a toy box, actually. It's so many toys. It just keeps on going. I once wrote a paper, "A moment can be a toy." And because of all the ways you can experience a single moment, all the attentional ways you can experience a single moment, my professor hated the title, hated the concept, because she basically thought it was unserious of me to think that way. Well, I'm kind of unserious, I guess. So, what else do we do? Here, next one. It understands, meaning embodiment that embraces many beings. Understands the action of the many is toward the one, and the action of the one is toward the many, that it also always is. So we've already gone through that. We're always many. And we're always moving, doing this outward, inward motion. And the more you start to have temporal skills, meaning you can oscillate your attention from this to that, the more powerfully you will be able to, golly, a whole series of stuff starts to become available when you can oscillate your attention. I went into it in November. Go to the November Breaking Bread to understand that further. It recognizes that everything touches everything and that all is entangled. Nothing is truly independent. I'm swinging right through these because I dealt with them last time. Strength and power, grace and beauty is an action of the many on every scale of being. So to stop thinking of selfhood as a single being. I'm going to cite Thich Nhat Hanh when I say that again. because his understanding of interbeing and the Buddhist notion of no mind or no being, of nothingness, is a very important understanding with respect to all of this. Thich Nhat Hanh in his, I think it's in his book, Being Peace, talks about what nothingness actually can mean. And nothingness can mean that where there is a piece of paper, there is no piece of paper. There are the clouds, there is the forest, there is the worker who cuts a tree, there is the sun, but nowhere is there paper. Paper does not make paper. And the same with the human being. We think that we are all this living, vital stuff. But how can that be so if you're made up of minerals that aren't themselves made up of living, conscious stuff? So somewhere there's a problem in that whole compositional idea that as dancers we work with and we have to play with. And when we do that play, trust me, the imagination will be part of it. It always has been, it always will be. Even if you were a scientist, the imagination would be present in what you can do. And anyway, so where there is a human being, there is no human being. And it's not all biological. Some of it, I mean, it's not all living. Where there is living, there is not living. The problem, how does that happen? We are emergent phenomenon. And as emergent phenomenon, we're interested in seeing what can an ensemble be? An ensemble can be an emergent phenomenon. What it does can be emergent. And that's, to get to that place, we need to allow our sense of embodiment to shift and change. Yeah? Makes sense. Oh my word, I'm looking at the clock and I'm going, I've already done half an hour. This is a problem because you can already tell this does not stop. This just keeps on going. Because it's very important to get to a place where you can accept that where you are, there is nothing but the emergence of you. But there is no human where you are. We have to allow ourselves to conceive what a human can be. And that's exciting and fun. Because it means if we're interested in having more true relations with greater capacity with the world that we are in. We're not in. I just used the known pronoun in as if I were in the world, separate from the world. The world is a different thing than me in that prepositional use. The world I am, or I am functioning as, I am a world that I am entangled as. If I'm interested in that and the relations that come of that perspective, those relations are have a capacity that is as yet unknown. greater and yet unknown, which is why the ISSC again, because the ISSC is curious about what those capacities can be. They already show up in ensemble practices as extraordinary.
As curious as I am about how this comes alive within your practice, your compositional practice, your ensemble practice with dance, what's alive for me right now is actually a curiosity of how this philosophy that you're living in and as has affected your relationship in your human to human relationships, not necessarily within ensemble, but how does this change your way of relating in the world with other humans?
It influences definitely my end of the relationship for sure. I do not always, in culturally normative situations, practice this work because I would be so different. So I generally practice. I normally, when I'm with people, become more identifiable and normative. Because if I were to practice these ways, I might not be. I'd be much more dancing the world. But I am interested in taking it into less normative states. And to do that, I think the ISSC is going to have to set up conditions that allow that to happen. When we do our conferences, for instance, we get all together. What else can I tell you about it? Let me think about that, the answer to that, because it's a really good question and it's an important question. How does this influence my experience in the world? When I walk through a forest, for instance, and I've used this forest analogy a lot, my experience of a forest is so large because it's tactily so dense. It's so resonant. And my belief, and this is my imagination, is that I feel a difference in how I am received. I feel that the difference of my attention is noted by the path I walk. So the soil that is underneath my feet, by the trees I am moving across and against and as, and, within a dance. It's hard to have the language because our language does not work this way. I struggle with language often in describing experience. I find that when I am doing, in my everyday life, it is so frequent that somebody thinks of me as I'm thinking of them, and the connection gets made, the phone call happens, it just, like me thinking, golly, I have enough money right now, I can get my fireplace fixed. And my brother calling me and saying, Nita, can you get your fireplace fixed? And we had not talked about my fireplace for maybe 2 years. Did that thought generate from him, or did it generate from me? What happens, and part of what I practice, is to hold myself lightly so that Nita is not the only mover of Nita. And that's why that kind of phenomenon happens. So that's the answer, I guess. Mm-hmm. And I expect that to happen in the woods as well. Because I experience my attention as touching. And I know if I've attended, I've already touched. I've already communicated. Communication does not happen after the fact. It happens as the fact.
Dear Nita, can you unfold this more? Hold myself lightly.
Okay. If we were in a studio, I'd be able to do that. I teach it within some courses I get to it. You know what balance is, right? Balance is motion. There is no center that you can, of balance that you can experience ever. It's always in motion. Tiny little embodied firing. It's a very vulnerable state, balance. It's a beautiful state. It's extraordinary. And if you practice certain martial arts, you can move right through that place that is, say, balance and anchor the self deeper into the earth so that you are a larger being. And now you become less easily moved, right? So I can do all, I have done all of that. I have been unmovable because I was a mountain, practicing mountain. So I know the action of the imagination and its influence on embodiment is huge. I also, when I'm dancing with people, can practice lightness. And that means that where Nita is, that other also is. I invite the other to be a larger space of being that includes me. So the word translocate comes to mind. I allow them to locate where they are and where I am as well. It's not that they move themselves into me. It's that they remain there and they just get larger. I also do that all the time to others. I locate when I'm doing a contact improv dance. Nita is also the legs of my partner, the arm of my partner. My partner can easily move me because I have offered them my attentional body. It's a gift, that attentional body. And to allow them to be present inside of me means that I can feel their call. I can feel the sending, I can feel the no's, I can feel the yeses. So if I hold myself lightly, a no is no different than a yes in that I've already done the no. As soon as I know that there's a no, it's already done. I don't have to respond, in other words, if I'm holding myself lightly, because I'm already on an attentional embodied state with my partner. I am, and this is something I didn't get to in today's talk, and I'll do it maybe in January. I'll talk about presence and the feeling of presence and how we communicate through presence. So that no and that yes that I'm talking about is on the level of presence. My partner is present as me because I have invited them in, if they can, if they have those skills. And that's a very good feeling, because then all of that information is already happened. I get it as they get it. It is what I call a state of communion.
Nita, there's another request for a bit of unfolding in the chat.
Okay.
In the not scientist, in the being a dancer, this person would like to listen a bit more of how you understand the two ways of being and researching. And I just want to give you the note that the not scientists part came up when you were talking about using imagination and not being afraid of it.
Yeah, well, as soon as she said that, or that question, or he or whomever they asked that question, I immediately thought, oh, that's a question about the imagination, because science, the imagination is not fondly received within scientific practices, because it clutters and it's unquantifiable. Science is very interested in the quantifiable. The humanities have managed to articulate the qualitative, the significance of qualitative data, which starts to move us toward receiving the imagination, because you have to ask, what's it feel like? And the second you get to what it's like, you're now in the world of metaphor. Right? What's it like to be talking to me on the through a screen? Now you have to try and tell me what that's like. And you're going to have to go to metaphor, because the only way we know the world is through embodied, because we have bodies. And our bodies have experiences. As dancers, we have direct experience constantly. Run your hand across a surface that is right in front of you spatially. Create a surface with space. At some point, let that become no, and tell me what happens. So you're here, you're rubbing a surface, and then it turns into no. What happens to you? What changes? Surface no. Anybody say something. What did your embodiment do?
It went from an awareness of path and plane to point.
It sure did. Yeah. And that, but it does something also. It doesn't just stay there. It moves outwardly. It has force in it. There's force present. This, it's so light and diffused and moving. It's moving across surfaces. No goes force. Feel what that force does in the air. Can you feel it? I feel the force. Speak to the air. The space knows. Stop. That was imagined. We do extraordinary things with the embodied imagination, which is what becomes our attention. What more can we do is the question. What more is here that we have dismissed?
I think if it's okay, in the interest of time and respecting all of y'all's time, I'm going to move to our conclusion. You can always write to Nita and ask more questions right on her website. This has been Breaking Bread with Nita Little. Thank you so much for being here, and we hope to see you all next month.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.